Life at Split Rock. My twin sister and I were born in 1951 in the old Mount Isa Hospital. My parents were Leslie George Letts and Oliver Ann Letts. I was about in the middle of the 8 kids they had. At that time, my parents were living at the Thatchers Road. I lived with them at home till I was about 2 years old. I had suspected polio, although sometime later I was told I had meningitis. Whatever it was, it meant I needed treatment. So I had to move to the Coosaringa home for crippled children in Townville to live. You see, I couldn't walk and they had to carry me. In those days, there were no services available locally. I lived at Coosaringa till I was 18 years old. My mum would come visit me as much as she could, about every 6 months, as she had the other kid to look after. I returned to live in Mount Isa for a while, but then went out with my grandparents, Bert and Claire Letts, who owned Split Rock, a property just outside Kemwell. We lived in an old tin house which only had 2 rooms for my grandparents, Dad and myself, and my uncle. In those days there was no electricity. There was only carbide lights. We had a wood stove and a copper boiler for a washer. We would come to Mount Isa for food every 6 months. We used to kill our own cattle for food and make our own bread. We used to buy in tinned veggies. We only had each other for company. We was too far off the road to have anybody visit. We had a radio. In those days there used to be a ranch club on Saturday night. We'd all sit around after supper and listen to country western music. My favourite was Slim Dusty. I collected all of his records. I had an old gramophone, one of them wind-up ones. I was probably one of the closest to my grandmother, as my father and the other man would be away for weeks at a time, tendering and mustering. I loved it out there. I loved the quietness, the clean air, none of this pollution that we have in town. I loved the wet season, the storms that used to come in October. Once the big wet came, it meant that we couldn't get out. Usually it was only Granny and me. This could last for a couple of months. If we ran out of stuff, like food or medicine, they would have to drop it out by aeroplane. I lived out there for about 20 years before I moved into Kemwell, eventually back to Mount Isa. Living out at Split Rock taught me everything. It was good for me. After being in the home, locked up for all those years, that had been my life. That's all I knew. Out there I had freedom. I wasn't treated differently from anyone else. I had to pull my weight to help out in any way I could. I couldn't do much station work, but I would do as much as I could help my grandmother around the house. We used to have goats and I used to milk them. I would do bore running, check the water, see if the tanks were empty. My dad was a foreman and windmill builder. I used to go out with him, build tanks to offside for him. I went out on camp and used to cook for them when they went on muster. Corned beef, stews, curries and risotto. I used to ride horses, won a few races, included in the Kemwell Cup. Those days really affected my outlook on life. I'd have a few health problems and it is helping me to get through these. People now say to me, how come you don't get down when you have all these things going wrong? I did at one stage, but guess my days at Split Rock taught me life goes on. You have to make the best of what you have and be thankful for what you got. I now realise that even though I have a disability, I'm pretty tough. I had to be to live the life that I did. There's not too much that gets on top of me or gets me down.